Good afternoon. I'm looking forward to being with you again a little bit later today as we welcome Shabbat with our Kabbalat Shabbat experience. But for now, hopefully, uh, this will provide some view into the portions of the week and the conversations that will continue uh, tomorrow during Torah study, and perhaps in your homes or in other ways. So a couple of years ago, I recounted to those attending a Kabbalat Shabbat both in person, yes, we were in person, and virtually, the details of an event that changed my life, I think, or changed the way I looked at my life. And it was a near-death experience. It was quite scary. And without recounting all the painful details, it was a car accident, and it was all of 34 years ago. No doubt, that night did change me. Now, over the past 5, 6, 7 weeks, how long has it been? We have been inundated. Our eyes, our ears are filled with constant reminders of death. We receive the daily tally. A perverse sense of keeping score floods my head. We have seen the mounting totals of those who have succumbed to this latest pandemic. Certainly, for those who need to pay attention to the logistical aspects of dealing with our present state, the trends and demographics detailed in these numbers have particular utility. However, for the rest of us, I can't believe that this hyper-attention to such morbid details, to these things, helps us to cope or to understand. As human beings, we all have at least two things in common. We are born and we die. Focusing on either of these events in a numbingly narrow way diverts our attention away from what matters. This week, we encounter a double Torah portion. That's because it's not a leap year, so we combine certain Torah portions as a rule. And this week we get Acharei Mot, coupled with Kiddushim. Now, in ordinary years, it would not be uncommon with this coupling that we would skip over Acharei Mot and rush right to the portion of Kiddushim. After all, it is what's called the Holiness Code. It has perhaps the most important or the highest principle in all of Torah, as Rabbi Akiva said. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. But I felt a little more drawn, at least to begin, to the first portion, Acharei Mot. It literally means after the death. And it refers to a continuation of a narrative that began a few portions before, in the portion of Shemini, when Nadav and Avihu brought forth what was called a strange sacrifice. And what happened? Immediately, God killed them by a consuming fire. Upon learning of their death, Aaron was not allowed to engage in the normal mourning rituals. Further, the people were told to bewail, to mourn the burning itself, as opposed to mourning the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. Now, picking back up to the beginning of that portion, Acharei Mot, this week's portion, Aaron is told to only come to the place of holiness, the holy place, at appointed times, at specific times. And perhaps this is a clue as to why Nadav and Avihu were punished. Perhaps not. There's arguments about this. Some thought that they were intoxicated. Some thought that they came when they weren't supposed to. Some thought that they improvised the sacrifice. But whatever the reason, Aaron is taught and told to come to the holy place only at specific times, and that he should wear specific clothing. Now, by this reference at the beginning of the portion, it is clear that Aaron's life continues on, that he moves immediately into his role, his function as a priest, carrying out the sacrificial cult on behalf of the community, and wearing the priestly vestments, differentiating not only the action of the sacrifice, but differentiating him from the rest of the community. Now, in Ecclesiastes, in Kohelet, there's a curious verse, and I have spoken about this verse in other settings, but it's relevant here. And the verse goes like this, or the part of the verse, and it says, "The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth." Now, about this strange verse, which sounds very odd, a commentary arose that speaks about, it basically tells a story, and the story is about arriving passenger ships and departing passenger ships, and what the people on the pier are doing at the deportation and at the leaving and at the coming. Excuse me. And what the author of this sermon or commentary derives from this story that he tells is that the reason that Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, says that the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth is that when these ships are coming in, or when a life is done, we understand and we know the fullness, the completeness of the life. We know what the person has done. We know what they've accomplished, as opposed to the day of one's birth, where we have absolutely no clue what they will or won't do, if they will be sinful or not. But at the moment of their death, we know it all, or certainly God does. Now, a similar idea is portrayed in a poem that you are probably familiar with by Zelda, whose yahrzeit was either last week or this. She died April 30th of 1986. And it says, "We each have a name," and it begins with birth, not necessarily as a direct quote of the poem, but by inference that we each have a name given to us by our mother and our father, which is precisely what happens 8 days after birth. And it ends with given by our death. But the poem is not about the beginning and the end. It's about the details in the middle. It's about the interactions, the friends, the enemies, the sins, all the deeds, the way the earth and knows this person. That's the name that one would gain. And it's that section in the middle that is what matters. It's between the birth and the death. And I think that perhaps the coupling of our portions, Acharei Mot and Kiddushim, have been trying to tell us that all along. Because if you put the two together and you think about what they mean, and you think about the origin of their title, Acharei Mot, and then Kiddushim Tihiyu, after death, you shall be holy. If you put them together like that, you begin to think about, well, what is important? It's not the death itself, it's the life. It is how we live. It's the great, shall we say, in-between. So what I would like for us to do is to not focus on the beginning or the end, but only on the in-between. And by doing that, we can focus on the richness, the fullness, the potentiality of our lives, the possibility of an elevated life through acts of holiness, Kiddushim. That's my wish for all of us. So please accept that wish and my wish for a Shabbat Shalom. Take care.